my name is Audrey Scritchfield.
Hi, my name is Isles Scritchfield.
Will you help a child in need?
Hey listeners, my girls and I would like to invite you to join us this holiday season in supporting a nonprofit we care very deeply about. It's called the Homeless Children's Playtime Project. If you visit wishlist.playtimeproject.org, you'll see an Amazon wish list for gifts that are requested to help a DC homeless child have a happier holiday. Again, it's wishlist.playtimeproject.org. Happy holidays! If you think it's time to take a hammer to your bathroom scale and rip up the diet rulebook, well, welcome to Body Kindness. Hi, everyone. It's Rebecca Scritchfield, author of Body Kindness and host for this podcast. I'm a health at every size dietitian, a certified exercise physiologist, a former chronic dieter, and mom to 2 girls. Join me as I talk to guests about what it means to be good to ourselves and create a better life where well-being matters, not weight. Through these conversations, we'll reveal the challenging and surprising ways our culture keeps us searching for our worth in our appearance. So let's create a new view of health that's inclusive and built on compassion and respect for all bodies. Let's shake things up and let's change the game.
And even if nobody has overtly discriminated against you, or even if in your day nobody does overt discriminate against you, you nevertheless walk through your day anticipating threat, anticipating stigma. You get on the bus and you're expecting people to glower at you and thinking, oh, I hope there's a seat so I don't have to ask somebody to shove up and, and have them give me that look. You go into the shop and think, well, you go to a restaurant for lunch and you think, well, if I order chips or French fries, people are going to be looking at me and thinking, there's all this anticipation of stigma, of living in a hostile environment. And that is absolutely constant.
That was Dr. Angela Meadows. Angela is a health and social psychologist specializing in the relationship between experienced and internalized weight stigma and health and well-being in higher weight individuals. She is particularly interested in determinants of response to stigma. So, for example, why some people internalize negative beliefs, whereas others resist devaluation. She's published a number of articles and book chapters and has been interviewed by numerous media outlets internationally. She writes on issues around weight and health for print and digital media. And I've got several links to her work in the show notes, so please do not forget to check those out. In 2013, she founded the annual International Weight Stigma Conference, and you'll hear us discuss that quite openly for a while in the beginning of the episodes. You're going to hear us talk about the roots of the conference, who could or should attend. We share the link to that conference in the show, but that will also be in the show notes. And I also wanted to share a very exciting announcement that recently came through after our recording, but before I was launching the episode. So I'm really excited to just add this piece in. So there is currently an open call for papers. This is part of the Journal of Applied Psychology, and Dr. Angela Meadows is one of the 2 guest editors. So they are looking to cover current advances in the study of weight stigma, applied and intersectional lenses. So there is a website that I will share in the show notes where you can check that out. This is something, if you are not a researcher and this wouldn't fit you, but maybe you're a student studying, or researchers, or you just have a social platform, or you just feel like sharing this, please do that, because right now is the window. Interested authors can submit a brief abstract by January 14th, 2019. So we've got some time here in order to check this out, share, make sure we get some great submissions. And I know I'll be interested to see when this will go to publication and when it's out. Certainly read the research and try to find some more guests for the podcast. So really hope you enjoy the show. Books make great gifts, and I would love to help you give the gift of body kindness this holiday season. Visit bodykindnessbook.com/order, and you can order 1 or save some money when you order 6 or more copies. Again, that's bodykindnessbook.com/order. The price includes shipping in the United States, and I'm happy to customize those orders. Also, don't forget, Body Kindness will be available on audiobook starting December 25th, 2018. You can order it now with your Audible credit for this month, or you can do an Audible trial and you'll actually be able to order it and get it free. So you can learn more at Audible by just searching for the term Body Kindness, and you'll find the page right there. Go ahead and pre-order. And then don't forget to visit bodykindnessbook.com/presale. When you submit your proof of purchase, you will get some free goodies as a thank you from me where you can't get anywhere else. Happy holidays. Angela, welcome to Body Kindness.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I have long admired all your very important work, and I'm so glad you made the time to come here and chat with me today. And I always like to let listeners know kind of how do I know my guest, and so this story is really interesting. You know, we are both proponents of the health at every size approach and philosophy, and we are both involved in the movement, and you have a particular involvement that I think is underserved and very helpful because you actually organize an international conference on weight stigma. And unfortunately, I have not been there yet, but I think my time is coming. I think it's getting closer to the United States. I hope I can make it work because I know that you have amazing speakers and amazing content that really just gets lost or hidden in a lot of the other professional spaces. So I would love for you to start by talking first a bit about your background and how you've come to organize this conference. And then I'd love for us to talk a little bit about the conference and then take a deep dive into weight stigma after that.
Sure. Well, I like to say that I founded an International Weight Stigma Conference pretty much by accident. It never, I never set out to do that. I just started my Ph.D. in the UK, and I was studying weight stigma, but I came to the health at every size movement and an understanding of stigma in society kind of late in the game. And I'd already arranged to do a PhD on a different topic. So the woman who'd agreed to supervise me originally said, yeah, okay, I know nothing about weight stigma, but I'm happy to support you academically, go for it. So nobody in my lab, my department, or as far as I knew, my university was working on weight stigma or prejudice of any kind. At the time, this was 2012, all of the literature that I was seeing seemed to be coming out of 2 or 3 labs in the US. I didn't know anybody that was interested in this. And I saw about a month after I started my PhD, I saw an ad or an email, a departmental email saying that there was a little bit of funding available for postgraduate students to put on a conference. It was, a transferable skills development kind of thing. And it was £1,000. So I don't even know what that is in today's money. It's about $1,300. It's not a huge amount of money. Right. And I thought, well, me and the maybe 6 people in the UK that care about weight stigma, ought to get to know each other. I really hardly knew anybody. So I applied for this funding, which I was granted. I didn't know where to look for people. My husband and I spent an entire weekend listing every university in the UK, every department that might have something to do with weight stigma, which is a lot of them. It crosses a lot of disciplinary boundaries, and getting contact email addresses for everyone. And for logistical reasons, the actual date of the conference was 3 months, almost to the day, after I got notification that it was being funded.
Ooh, that's like no time at all for anyone who is planning a conference. That's no time.
And I had no idea what I was doing. I had no experience. I just plastered emails everywhere. Word of mouth on some of the speakers. People said, have you thought about so-and-so? We charged just enough to cover the food, a reception. My supervisor didn't want me to charge at all. She thought that might put people off. But I had no idea how many people had turned up. And I thought, if I charge just enough for the food, then I get an extra 50 people maybe, please God, or an extra 20 or 10. Then I'm not out of pocket. So 3 months of the day later, there were nearly 100 people who turned up and packed into this little room.
Wow.
It was a one-day conference back then. It was quite an event. There were multiple disciplines there. They seriously clashed.
Wow.
There was almost bloodshed. There were definitely tears. This is not an exaggeration. It was quite something. And by the end of that first day, 2 people had volunteered to host it again in the future. And I think one of the things that I find most gratifying about organising this conference and being involved in it, and I get the same from the local hosts every year when they think there aren't very many people locally interested in their subject, is finding out just how many people are interested and are working on this, either in research terms or clinicians who, know that something isn't quite right but don't know what to do about it.
And would that be who you're trying to target, researchers and clinicians, to get in the same room? What about activists or people who care passionately about weight stigma and want to do more? Are they part of the people who would be interested to come to?
Absolutely. We try and target everybody because, my life isn't complicated enough already. It's activists, it's policymakers, it's people, government, and the UK in particular. Public health is run by local government rather than by the health services, which we have in the UK.
Yes.
For a minute. We do get activists. Even amongst academics, this covers a very broad range of people. Right. So we have sociologists coming at it from a fat studies perspective, queer studies, this kind of thing. And then we have the obesity people who think that the obesity epidemic, I wish you could see me now because I've got my fingers in the air.
The famous air quotes.
The obesity epidemic is going to destroy the planet, but we want to be nice to fat people while we're trying to... And try and put all these people into one room together. And it becomes very difficult. And trying to cater to everybody, you're never going to succeed. People are always going to be angry with you at one point or another. I straddle the fence more than some of the activists would like. It's not a health at every size conference. Right. There is one of those already. Yep. There's the ASDA conference, the Association for Size, Diversity and Health. So we do try and reach out to the health people, and a lot of them are coming from a different paradigm. And many of the activists and even the sociologists, the fat studies people, feel that as a conference, we're too accommodating health professionals that aren't already, if you like, woke around fat rights and what have you. And as a social justice issue, to them, it's a medical problem. And it's very difficult because everybody hates me.
Right. That's funny. Everybody hates me.
And it means I'm doing my job now.
Yeah. They come to the conference, but when they're there, they hate you. And but I think that also shows that it shows the need, because I know exactly what you mean. So as a clinician, when I have someone in my office, like, I'm not doing a bait and switch, like using weight stigma to try to get a client, but I know that clients have weight concerns, and I can't expect that they're going to show up with 0 weight concerns. And so as a clinician, I have to make space for them to be where they're at, even if I see internalized weight stigma, and even if I see all this harm, and like, I wish that they thought differently or acted differently, or I wish that they were further along, but my job is to listen and to be present and to help them move further along. And so, I could see in a conference setting, when you think about what is the benefit, we're not going to change the culture working in silos. And so we all do what we need to do for self-care, but the folks who are from the, medical model paradigm, they need to do a lot of work to learn and grow, but they're there at a weight stigma conference. And so them getting uncomfortable will help them learn and grow, even if they hate you in the moment and don't see it. And also, I would say that those who are further in fat activism, who care to attend and to do that emotional labor, it is hard. And also at the same time, understanding you are there to help bring them along as well and speak for your rights. And it's gonna be messy. Mind you, we're encouraging people to attend this thing, but we might as well be prepared.
It's a nightmare. I love it. Everybody loves it.
Yeah.
I mean, the trouble is some people come thinking it's an obesity conference.
Yeah.
Some of these people don't come looking to do the emotional work. They're not at that position,
Right.
not at that point yet.
Yeah.
A lot of people look at the conference and just don't come.
Yeah.
Because we're a bunch of liberal, lefties, softy, beating heart activists.
Yes.
So you tend to get a lot of middle ground people, which is a good place to be.
Mm-hmm.
It means that there's dialogue to be had there.
Mm-hmm.
It does tend to alienate people who are not quite already on that journey. There have been some remarkable success stories that, make my heart sing, who weren't in that place, had never thought of it before, but who were open enough to listen and say, actually, I'd never really realized what we were doing there. I'm going to do this differently, which just makes everything worthwhile. But yeah.
That's awesome. So what's the website for the conference?
Nice and easy. It's stigmaconference.com.
Awesome. Okay. I'll be sure to include that link in the show notes. Is there a date? Is there a date set for the future?
There is. Next year, 2019, we're coming near you. We're at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, so just outside Toronto. And that will be on the 19th and 20th and 21st of June. And it's going to be hosted by the amazing Rachel Calogero, who is at Western now, who actually hosted the 2014 conference when she was in the UK. So we have history, and she wants to work with me again.
So she must be the one who doesn't hate you. So that's June 20th and 21st in Toronto.
Near Toronto. It's London.
Near. Oh, London.
Yes.
Okay. So London, Ontario. Okay. All right. I'm going to have to put it in a map and see, but we're going to encourage people to go.
Please come. Absolutely. It really is open to anybody, whatever stage of the journey you're at. There are people who are listening to the podcast who are very much coming at it from an individual rather than a professional perspective. What we do find is in the past, it has been quite challenging for some people because, as you said, there's a lot of internalized stigma around. There's a lot of work to be done, and people in the room are often talking about sort of quite horrible things. One of the trouble with being a stigma researcher is that you just have to read about all these terrible experiences people have, and then you're describing them to other people. Even the activists in the room who think they've heard it all, occasionally there's more. So we try to be very understanding. You can take as much time out as you need. There are always people there to talk to if things get. I'm really not selling this conference.
Well, actually you are, because it just shows that if you are looking for body liberation and peace for yourself, but also a better culture for you, for, relatives or children, if you have them, or just knowing that we're all renting Earth temporarily and you would like to know that you're part of leaving the Earth better than when you inhabited it, that it is work. It is effort to change. It's effort to eradicate stigma in an individual level and also a cultural level. And so I think you are selling it by being honest of just showing that there is effort involved, but you're also being very welcoming and saying anyone could come. I could certainly see benefits even if, I was not any type of helping professional, but I had internalized and experienced weight stigma, how attending certain sessions could be helpful to reduce the self-blame and that I am the problem, the body is the problem, and even to see, wow, like these experts can't even get along in certain areas. And wow, there's a lot of cultural work to do. How do I work on my own well-being, knowing that this makes sense, the doctor might treat me this way, and this makes sense that this is how it's covered in the media. So there could be an interesting freedom awareness that would come from your presence, even if you aren't a researcher, a policymaker, a helping professional, which is already, I can think of lots of people who could benefit from attending.
We also try to have workshops, breakout sessions that can be very much targeted at individual self-care or growth. That depends very much on who submits proposals in a given year. So keep an eye on the program or submit something yourself if you'd like to see something like that.
Ooh, yeah, we can get some listener submissions too. That's awesome.
That would be
Well, let's back it up for a minute, like way back. I would love to learn about how you even got into weight stigma. I understand that you chose it and nobody else knew how to support you, but you got support and it led to this conference. But why weight stigma? How did that even come about for you?
That's actually an interesting story. Like very many people that are proponents of the health at every size paradigm, I originally came from the other side of the coin. I was very much within the medical model because that's how I grew up. That's what everybody was telling me, and that's what the doctors were saying. That's what the television was saying. And later when I started studying, that's what my lecturers and my textbooks were saying, that obesity, if you like, being heavier is bad for your health. And that's the end of it. And you can weight and you just need to try harder and you need to eat less and move more and the weight will just drop off you. So I grew up with this. My mother was a dieter her whole life. I have memories of her standing in the kitchen with her Weight Watchers points book, eating her cottage cheese while the rest of the family ate dinner. And like very, very many women of my generation and the previous generation and the one after it, sadly, that's what I grew into. And I started dieting before I would even be considered by today's standards or by BMI standards to be overweight, as do many young women. And of course, I dieted myself heavier and heavier because that's what tends to happen once you start messing with your body's natural signals, start restricting foods. And I got heavier and heavier. And I was blaming myself, of course, because everybody was saying it must be my fault. So I learned more about nutrition. I learned more about exercise. And I just stayed on this cycle over and over again. And I kept thinking, if I just knew more, if I just understood the right piece of information. So I qualified as a personal trainer. That didn't do the job. So then I did a master's in, of all things, weight management, which turned out to be just a much more expensive way of doing the same thing I was already doing. But all that was wrong with it, I have to credit that course, not intentionally, with my rebirth, because I was doing my final assignment was on exercise and weight loss. So I was doing the research for this assignment, and I stumbled across a paper that most of the health every size activists and scientists would know about, which is the Wei et al. Paper. That's Wei, WEI, from 1999. And in this paper, in this study, it's what's called a cohort study. So they follow a large group of people over time. And they'd been collecting participants in this study since the 1970s. So they had a lot of data. And it's a very well-run study. Every couple of years there are questionnaires, but every 5 years they get them into the laboratory and they put them on a treadmill and they do exercise testing and they do blood tests and look at their biochemistry. And they follow these people over time. And the paper that I actually read was one where they were looking at the effects of fitness on mortality. So were you more likely to die if you were fitter, basically, or less fit? And they'd split the results by BMI categories. And what they found was that for people who were so-called normal weight by BMI category and in the top level of fitness, and we're just talking about normal everyday fitness here, talking marathon runners.
Like walking, going to a yoga class or something.
They weren't looking at exercise levels. They were looking at fitness from a treadmill test. But it was a normal population. They weren't athletes. So the people that were upper levels of fitness there. And compared with them, people who were, again, so-called normal weight, who were unfit, were dying within the same period at about twice the rate. So even without being heavier, the mortality, all-cause mortality, so dying for any reason, was about twice the risk. And if you were in the BMI category called overweight, the risk was a little bit higher. It was 2.5 times. And if you were in the higher BMI category, the risk was even higher still. So just what you would expect. But what I hadn't expected was that if you were fit, whatever your BMI, whether it was so-called normal weight, overweight, obese, whatever, you had the same risk. The weight did not matter at all. Fitness was like the great leveler. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. All my studying, I've never heard that before. And this study, as I said, it was really well conducted. It had a huge sample size. It was 26,000 men. And it was published in one of the leading journals in the medical field in 1999. So it was like 12 years earlier. And I thought, I've been studying this all this time and I've never heard this. This is amazing. I wonder if anybody else has, done some follow-up work. So I actually went looking. There are ways you can look to see if anyone's cited previous research or done follow-up studies. And all of a sudden, there was all this research that I had no idea existed. So these results have been replicated in women. They've been replicated in people that had illnesses to start with, so diabetes or hypertension. So regardless of what else was going on, if you maintained a decent level of fitness, your risk level for the things that we tend to associate with being heavier kind of disappeared. And there are more and more studies showing this now. So people that lead what are called healthy lifestyles, so not drinking too much, not smoking, exercising. I mean, the studies that have done it are looking at like 3 times a week for 30 minutes. We're not talking excessive here.
Right.
These risks come right down. And the thing to remember, of course, is that the things that we do ourselves, our behaviors and what have you, they actually account for quite a small proportion of our overall health risk. I mean, what's really the biggest driver of health outcomes is things like poverty, socioeconomic status, food insecurity. I mean, things that are very difficult to address. So it's not all about, yes, individuals can go out and make their lives so much better. But to the extent that you might want to change certain aspects of your lifestyle to improve your health, certainly you don't need to be trying to lose weight to do it. And those of us that have worked in the profession for any length of time know that those kinds of things are generally not very successful. The point being that anything you do in terms of behavior, if you're leading at what's called a healthy lifestyle, any lifestyle that you like is fine, but, doing these kinds of things, then, whatever weight your body settles at is your healthy weight. And any weight that you maintain by having to do other things below that weight, so whether it's by over-exercising or under-eating or taking pills or whatever, it's not going to be healthy. It's not going to be good for you. So really focus on the behaviors and take the focus off the scales was the message. And this was a revelation to me. And from there, I sort of managed to, I followed up. I mean, one of the papers that I read was a very famous one by Linda Bacon and Lucy Aphramore, who were very involved in the Health at Every Size movement at that time. And it sort of introduced me to HAES and to the people in HAES. And then I became interested in weight stigma through that, because, we were getting all these messages and it was basically a lie from top to bottom. And so much of it was around, fear of fatness. And
yeah, I think that there is a lot of research out there that, like, similar to you, it was like picking up the breadcrumbs. Like, you find one thing and you start to realize that there is mounting evidence. What we believe about people doesn't necessarily hold true when we actually look at the studies, right? So you start to see that there's the cultural beliefs that we have about people based on their size and what science and data actually shows. And I mean, there's even reasons for why we don't have enough of that research and that come into play here. And I think that's all part of our like individual wake up calls, right? Like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this before. I didn't know about this. I haven't gotten this message. And I imagine as a researcher, knowing how valuable having data is, that it was like, I don't know, too good to be true, like winning the lottery or something, that, where there's this feeling of, now I have something meaningful that I can study and pay attention to. Now I can make sense of the past, and now I have something to contribute to.
All of a sudden, everything kind of fell into place. All the things that, just didn't seem to make sense. I was trying so hard and all the rest of it. All of a sudden, there was an alternative explanation that everything made sense. But it's interesting that you talk about the research behind all this, because I think one of the things that I've learned in the last few years is, and it's a growing body, if you like, of evidence, more and more coming out all the time, that a lot of the diseases and health problems that are often blamed on being heavier are actually or can be caused by stigma. And this is not just true of weight stigma, which is, sometimes, we'll get some kickback saying, oh, you're just making excuses for being fat. But right across the prejudice literature, the evidence is very, very solid on this. Being exposed to chronic stresses associated with living in an environment where a group that you belong to, whether it's because of your race, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, whatever, acts as a chronic stressor on the body. You're constantly alert, you're hypervigilant, every interaction is a potentially negative thing. And our fight or flight system that was designed or evolved to cope with very sudden instantaneous threats is having to work overtime all the time. And that has very, very negative effects on the body. So we have all these stress hormones being released, and it affects the nervous system, it affects the immune system, it affects the cardiovascular system. And being exposed to chronic stress or discrimination or stigma is associated with increased risk of heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, all of these things, as well as all the psychological problems that come with that. And that is across the stigma literature. That's not just to do with weight. And it's quite interesting that in cultures and countries where heavier weights were or are mostly were idealized, we didn't really see those relationships between being heavier and being unhealthy. It just kind of didn't exist, which raises the question of, is it the weight that's the problem, or is it the environment in which weight is completely demonized? Being heavier is demonized. It's getting harder and harder to do research in these countries because, we've just exported our fat hatred worldwide. Even in cultures where fat was once considered desirable, there's a lot of stigma these days, which is very, very sad.
Yeah. So I want to back it up for a second and give some clarity points for listeners that I think will be really helpful. So how about if you could first clarify that stigma, so weight stigma, like an individual can have bias, that's put in there by culture. And then there's the cultural oppression. So there's multiple forms of weight stigma. But the other thing I think people don't understand is that it's not just what you would put in your mind as the worst case scenario. Like, I'm outside walking down the street and somebody yells at me, "Hey, fatty, why don't you just go and die?" That shit happens. Yes. And that is wrong and unacceptable, gross. But I think that people don't really understand that there are microaggressions that are forms of weight stigma that also inhabit a person's body. So I'd love for you to add a little color to that, and also so that you can help listeners understand the difference between experienced weight stigma and then internalized weight stigma that helps to describe that stress response that then increases your risk for the chronic diseases.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. I mean, most people, when they say they're not bigoted or they've never experienced discrimination, they're talking about these worst case scenarios. They might never have thrown a stone through somebody's window or screamed something out of a car. But that's not the lived experience of most people. That's not what defines our day-to-day existence in a stigmatized body or a stigmatized identity. You mentioned two types of stigma. There's actually another one, really. So there's experiencing weight stigma from other people. There's internalized stigma, which is kind of when we do it to ourselves. So it's that voice inside our head that says, "You're fat, you're disgusting, you're worthless, nobody could love you." So there's all that culturally imbued stigma. So that can happen whether or not anybody else stigmatizes you. You can still do it to yourself. But there's also what I would call anticipated stigma, which some people kind of bundle together with internalized weight stigma. So I was smiling to myself when you used that term, sort of all-encompassing, because we all fight about terminology. We don't have anything better to do. But it's so important when you're studying these things to understand what it is. So even if you don't stigmatize yourself, and even if nobody has overtly discriminated against you, or even if in your day nobody does overt discriminate against you, you nevertheless walk through your day anticipating threat, anticipating stigma. You get on the bus and you're expecting people to glower at you and thinking, "Oh, I hope there's a seat so I don't have to ask somebody to shove up and have them give me that look." You go into the shop and think, well, you're going to a restaurant for lunch and you think, well, if I order chips or French fries, people are going to be looking at me and thinking, there's all this anticipation of stigma, of living in a hostile environment. And that is absolutely constant. And then the microaggressions that you talked about are also a form of experienced stigma, but it's not the big stuff. It's the tiny little stuff. So it's when you get on the bus and somebody does actually give you a look, as in, don't sit next to me. They glare at you or they move their handbag so you can't sit on the seat next to them. A tiny little thing like that. It's when you overhear somebody telling a fat joke, or you're watching your favorite TV program and someone makes fun of a fat character. These aren't, this isn't somebody throwing a brick through your window, but it's a death by 1,000 cuts, if you like. It's these tiny little things that most people would say were inconsequential if it wasn't affecting them, or telling you to just get a sense of humor, or you're imagining it, or you're paranoid, or, or God forbid, if you don't like it, well, why don't you just lose weight, which is the other one. But these microaggressions, the microinvalidations that tell you that, you are not valued by society, that happen hundreds and hundreds of times every single day in a society that is so imbued with fat phobia, that really drive the lived experience. And it's something that people who don't belong to a stigmatized group often can't understand. And what I find works quite well, particularly with health professionals. So, for example, I'm seeing a physiotherapist at the moment. Most of them will have dealt maybe, or, if they've been involved in lots of exercise, they might have sprained an ankle or been on crutches at some point. So if you're normally very able-bodied, moving through the world is not something you give a second thought to. And if you suddenly find yourself in some way mobility impaired, you start to look at the world a little bit differently. So you start to think about, if a friend invites you out, thinking, are there steps there? Will I have to go up a ramp? Starting to plan ahead in your day. As you're walking down the street, you might be looking for an uneven pavement or something like that. And you're starting to think of things and look for potential threats where you never did before. And you're not walking through the world in the same way that you used to. And I think that's a very good analogy that most people can understand, in that people that have a stigmatized identity are not walking through the world the same way that people without one are. It's a different world. It's like a parallel universe. And this works for all kinds of stigma. It's what men don't understand sometimes about being a woman in a society that can be quite misogynistic. They think it's just about, the more severe forms of harassment or assault that we're talking about. But it's not. It's every single time you leave the house thinking, if I wear this skirt, am I, if people looking at me thinking I'm asking for it, is it safe for me to go to this place on my own, or do I need to get a taxi? If that man smiles at me and I smile back at him, is he going to attack me? You are not walking through the same world as people that don't have that identity. And it just, as I said, imbues every single aspect of your daily life and your existence. And the stress that has on you is just phenomenal.
Yeah, this is so interesting to me, because it's hearing you separate that out for me and defining and giving space for specific anticipated stigma, like that's words I haven't used before, and separating it out. And I'm just thinking about a recent experience of someone who is in one of my online groups who had her daughter at a pediatric appointment. 13-year-old, that normal stage of puberty and weight gain and all this stuff. And it was a horrible weight stigmatizing appointment. And the doctor's like, I want to see you in 6 months. And she came back and vented in the group. And we started expressing compassion and sharing some relevant resources with respect to how you're supposed to talk to kids about weight and bodies and risks. But she came into the group stressed, in tears, heart racing. Luckily, she reached out to us so she could get support, but she ended up deciding to cancel the follow-up and committing to put more emotional effort into finding a different doctor, which then is going to be uncertainty about, how do I set the boundary with this doctor? And will the same thing happen? And so, and I'm thinking that's just one flash in the pan, right? Yeah. Of how a mother will experience stigma. And then that created for her this anticipated, I have to fear this 6-month doctor's appointment. I cannot trust this doctor. This is a dangerous situation for my daughter. So this is fascinating to me, because then it shows it shows the need for our own personal resilience, right? It's not enough to tell higher weight people, toughen up, do this. But also, what do we have an agency over while we have to challenge and address the system, while we have to address the medical community, why we have to stop applying stigma? But I think it's also eye-opening, because on an individual level, if you can make sense of all this, you can start to see, okay, I can't control every situation around me, but what can I do for self-care to help regulate my emotion and my stress response, and to actually call out the behavior of the other people and how they're treating me, rather than absorb that and continue to let that harm myself. Is that what we would want people to, how we would want them to respond to this real evidence?
It's interesting that you should mention that, because my research is definitely moving in this direction. I'm very interested in the coping response to stigma. And again, we know from the wider literature that how people cope has a big impact on how experienced stigma affects them. As a general rule, internalizing and bowing to the stigma is always bad for you. It causes all kinds of health problems, physical, psychological. Fighting stigma, the response is more mixed. People that fight stigma tend to do better. As a general rule, they tend to be more empowered, they have more agency, better psychological outcomes. But there are sometimes personal costs involved in standing up to society or standing up to your doctor or your family member. So it's not something that can be taken lightly. And self-care always has to come first. So some days you might be ready to fight, and some days it's just about removing yourself from the situation and reaching out to somebody that can be there to support you. But you use the word resilience, which is often mentioned when talking about coping with stigma. But you also talked about challenging stigma, and I think they're not the same thing. I call it stigma resistance, which I thought was something that I invented, but of course other people have done it before if you look in the right places. So it's not just about not internalizing it. It's also about, one, internally rejecting that devalued status. So it's not just that you're immune to it or you brush it off, but as you said, saying that, look, this isn't me that's the problem here. It's rejecting the whole situation, but also challenging it. So calling people out when they make these comments. So I call it resisting stigma. And I think the difference between, in my mind anyway, between resilience and resistance is resilience gives you a kind of buffer. Absolutely, psychologically, it's something that gives you, wherever you draw your resilience from, other people or, internal resources, it does give you some kind of psychological benefits compared to people without it. But nevertheless, it's the victim of stigma who is being asked to alter themselves. It doesn't change the situation. It doesn't protect you from being discriminated against in an employment setting. You're not actually changing the circumstances. Whereas when you resist, when you fight back, when you challenge, you at least have the potential to address what's considered acceptable behavior, what's considered normal. And those of us that do activism know that quite often this is like banging your head against a brick wall. But to do nothing, I think, is worse. And we do see change. We see more people speaking out against, overt, blatant prejudice and discrimination, including against weight, which, traditionally is, sort of fallen under the radar a little bit. A lot of people, unfortunately, still think, well, it's kind of your fault that you're fat. So, if you don't like discrimination, then, lose weight. And it's interesting because, I don't think there are very many stigmatized identities where other people would say, fix yourself if you don't like it. If your redheaded child was being bullied at school, you wouldn't say, okay, let's dye your hair. It's not about fixing the victim. It's about fixing the problem that's important.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you made that clarification, and also ask listener to, you mentioned self-care is of utmost importance. So within your realm of self-care for your well-being, making space for both. So there are lots of ways to engage in activism and in resistance, right? So it could be seeing that Cosmo UK had Tess Holliday on the cover and seeing that she got raked over the coals for it, and being willing to publicly say, I'm so glad that this is happening. Had I been exposed to different size bodies growing up, I may have avoided body shame and eating disorder. As a society, we need to move ahead. Say what's in your heart, but you will feel a risk. You'll have that what if, whether you're, an ally to fat people or whether you're still doing your own anti-bias work on yourself. When you're silent, you're doing nothing. And that, I think, is worse than taking a risk and being vulnerable and taking a step and let your, activism evolve. I remember when I had Marilyn Wan on the podcast, and she said, look, it doesn't always have to be like angry, yelling picket signs. While those things are amazing, it can be, I found a place that makes a bikini in my size. And that has been something that I've never thought I would do. But me going to a pool party in a public and being present in my body is a form of resistance. And that is meaningful. And that's going to lead to other forms of resistance in the culture, which even if other people don't respond openly,
yes,
it's a lesson.
It plants a seed. It changes what's considered normative, just changing the visual environment as well. But I mean, even going back a step from Marilyn's bikini is buying the bikini. I mean, when you talked about Tess Holliday on the cover of Cosmo UK, I actually didn't know that because I don't read Cosmo UK.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Right. Buy it, rather than even just having to speak up about it or, challenge your friends about it. Go out and buy it. Buy half a dozen copies, show the advertisers and the producers of these products that are out there for consumers that it's in their interests, not to demonize fatness, that there is a market out there of fat people who want to feel good about themselves, who want to be represented in society, and who will support you if you provide for them.
Absolutely.
It's all activism.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been such a really, really helpful conversation. I think that what people are going to really get out of it is to understand that weight stigma is real, that we need more research funded that looks at the physiological impacts of weight stigma. And we need to do these things that are part of our long game in changing the culture. And we need to work on our own individual mindsets and just examining how we talk to ourselves and see ourselves and our beliefs that have been ingrained in us, and challenge ourselves to evolve, because we can reduce people's experience stigma just by examining and understanding what is stigma and doing less of that, keeping asking ourselves to do better in our own lives, taking it day by day. And for those, whether you're in a space of a professional who wants to do more in weight stigma, or you're a person who is looking at being more involved in understanding weight stigma and taking meaningful action, they can read your research and work. They can attend the Weight Stigma Conference. That there are books to read. There are lots of good positive actions people can take.
Absolutely. And listen to your gut instinct. Do what feels right for you.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Where can people find and follow you to stay in touch?
Okay, I'm on Twitter. I have just changed my Twitter ID. I still blush a little bit when I tell it to people. It's at DRA Meadows, Dr. A Meadows. The doctor part's brand new, so I'm still very excited about it.
Congrats!
A Meadows. On Facebook, I host Never Diet Again UK. So if you just Google that. I also have a website which was set up a few years ago when I was hoping to do online courses. They've kind of taken a back seat whilst I've been doing my PhD. But I occasionally blog on there. And also I put out a newsletter that you can get by signing up to that. So I've started doing that again, which covers the research every week. So again, if you just Google Never Diet Again UK, you should come across that.
Well, wonderful. I'll also include all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Lovely talking to you.
And that's a wrap on today's show. Let's continue the conversation on Facebook. Just search Body Kindness Podcast and click to join. And if you can contribute to the production costs for the 2018 podcast season, visit gofundme.com/bodykindness. We love ratings and reviews. Please do that. And don't forget to let your friends know that Body Kindness is one of your can't miss podcasts. If you have questions, comments, or guest recommendations, shoot me an email, Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com.